place to find your one-to-one financial advisor. St James's Place Wealth Management plc is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. SJP approved 19th of Feb 25.
Here at Pets in a Pickle, our name has caused some confusion. We've had people asking us what pickles we recommend, but they're barking up the wrong tree. We actually offer simple, fuss-free pet insurance policies for cats and dogs. Visit petsinapickle.co.uk. For actual pickles, try the supermarket.
On our farms, there's room to roam. Our girls come first in the happy home. Toys for fun and special feed made with all they need. Lots of trees for shade and rest. Our farmers give them their very best.
Happy Hens lay tasty eggs for the Happy Egg Co.
Sheila Fogarty on LBC.
You know, we spoke last week and this week again about the chaos, violence and abuse sometimes in many of our classrooms, in schools. And I expressed, you did as well, your frustration at why teachers aren't given, either don't have the ability, in which case get out the classroom, or aren't given the ability, the empowerment to actually tackle the behaviour that happens in their school. And again, I just felt that we've just gone very soft on so many things that used to just be a given. You know, that basic. I mean, things were never perfect. I'm not suggesting they ever were or ever will be, but we just seem to be soft on bad behaviour in schools. Overly harsh, probably, on kids who aren't causing any trouble, and soft on some of the worst offenders in our prisons. Relatively speaking, soft on them, versus those people committing much lesser crimes and being possibly too hard on them, or at least unimaginative in how we handle them. So what do you say the balance should be there when it comes? I'm speaking today about prisons. Are you in favour of arguably softer but more constructive sentences outside of prison for lesser offenders, but much, much tougher circumstances for the worst kind of offenders, like the Abedi brothers who caused the Manchester arena bombing? Just to give you one example, but sadly we know many other hideous examples of crimes and killings where the crime is just as serious. Your thoughts, 0345 6060 973. Now, I'll talk to Alex Taylor-Brown in just a moment, LBC's Yorkshire correspondent who's in Scunthorpe, keeping a close eye on those British Steel blast furnaces. They are set to continue running after the government announced today it secured delivery of some key raw materials. But the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, has just had this to say in the last few minutes.
Well, first of all, I am delighted that after an incredible cross-government effort, we have secured the raw materials we need to keep the blast furnaces going. And I want to say a huge thank you to all the staff at British Steel, all the people who have been involved in really, really pulling out the stops to make sure we've got that continuity of supply. Yes, supporting British Steel is the right thing to do. We're calling Parliament to take back control of the situation, to make sure the blast furnaces weren't lost in an unplanned way with all the consequences that would come from that. I believe we can improve on the financial performance that we have seen. But I have said from the beginning that the kind of support we're now putting in place for British Steel is better value for the country, better value for the taxpayer than offering hundreds of millions of pounds for significant job losses in a way we weren't quite confident that transformation programme would deliver what we need for the future, or potentially being here today talking to you about thousands of people having lost their jobs with a cost to the Exchequer to support those people at well over £1 billion.
Like a Trump helicopter statement, wasn't it? The noise in the background there. Alex Taylor-Brown, LBC's Yorkshire correspondent. I hope you don't have to battle such noise. Bring us up to speed then on what's happened overnight since we last spoke, Alex.
Yes, afternoon, Sheila. Well, yeah, I'm stood here looking at those two blast furnaces, the big towers where the smoke is continuing to rise out of them. But, you know, there were fears that that wouldn't be happening. We would be seeing these scenes, and that if the government didn't step in when they did, then those raw materials could run out and the blast furnaces would sort of cool down, which they can't be allowed to do. So this was a race against time. These raw materials, which include iron ore and coking coal, are being offloaded around 20 miles east of here at the Port of Birmingham, which is where we just heard the Business Secretary speaking from there. These shipments have come from the US. Another is expected to be on its way from Australia. But the shipments that are being unloaded now, they've been either sat in the dock or just offshore for a while because Xingye, the Chinese owner of British Steel, just refused to pay for them. So the government stepped in, obviously, over the weekend. Parliament passed this emergency legislation which allows the government to direct British Steel. We're chatting to Charlotte Brunton-Childs, who's the GMB union's national lead on steel, and she says it was vital that the government stepped in when they did.
We procure our raw materials from all over the world. They can take up to 4 weeks to arrive, which is what the issue was with the timing. So if we hadn't got the raw materials being delivered this week, then there would have been a gap in being able to fuel the blast furnaces. If you cool the blast furnaces down in an uncontrolled way, you end up with solidified iron at the bottom, and it ends up collapsing in on itself, and you won't be able to use it again.
So the materials being offloaded from the ships on a sort of conveyor belt. They'll then be transported here on the railway line which connects the port to the steelworks here. Now, Xingye have been accused by some of the unions of industrial sabotage, not only over not procuring those materials which were there, but also acting in bad faith by rejecting a £500 million rescue deal from the government. And over the weekend I was here, and police were actually called because workers were refusing representatives of Xingye into the premises. The business minister Sarah Jones has told LBC this morning that the materials have been bought with existing money from her department's budget.
We bought at the commercial rate. I wouldn't divulge how much it will be. Obviously, we will report on our progress and on what we've spent over in the future. But at the moment, we're buying things at commercial rates, and I can assure you and your listeners that we have those raw materials in place. We have supplies coming from Sweden, from Australia, and from the US.
Sarah Jones also didn't rule out future Chinese involvement in sort of British infrastructure. And there is scepticism here from the workers that I've spoken to over the past few weeks about the Chinese involvement here. They maintain that this is where the best steel in the world is made. There's been a huge sense of relief here. On Saturday, people were walking around the town. They were glued to their phones watching MPs debating in the House of Commons over the future of the plant here, over the future of this entire community. Scunthorpe is why the steelworks is why Scunthorpe exists. It's based around this industry. So a reprieve for now. Many here still want it to be nationalised, at least in the short term, and hopefully a steel-making facility here for the long term.
Thanks very much, Alex. Alex Taylor-Brown. So more promising news today, but complex times for British Steel at Scunthorpe. Thanks to Alex. Let's get back to your calls on this whole question of what we do about the sort of lesser prisoners and the most serious prisoners, because on current evidence we don't seem to know what to do with either. Oscar's called from Birmingham. Hi, Oscar.
Hello, hi there, how are you?
Fine, thank you. You are a former prison officer yourself.
Yes, that's correct, yeah. I wanted to say, just then you've actually made a good point with lesser and harsher crimes, or should we say. I personally think that we shouldn't be using the word like that. Like it's more of a softer language towards someone who's, I don't know, there's someone online the other day, I think 152 previous convictions of theft, domestic violence, and like things that people just try to brush under the carpet. I wouldn't put
domestic violence ever in the lesser category. I'd stick them in jail for a long time.
Yeah, I think even these what people think petty theft, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be that, because you've got frontline workers who are having to deal with that person trying to run out the store, the violence. There was one not long ago where someone pulled a blade or something inside the Lidl's. I've seen the videos on it in social media, and I'm thinking, and this is the lesser crimes that people talk about. Why is that not being dealt with the same way as someone pulling a knife on someone in the street?
Yes.
I don't know. I think it begs the question, like, should there be, I don't know, you get caught in the street with a knife, should be a minimum 5 years. I think they might start to think twice once people start to actually get seen. I think we're very, very soft and lenient with sentences, of all nature, whether it's people committing the worst of crimes like murder, rape, whatever it is. I think we're very, very soft in the country. And then when it comes into the prison service and the establishment, I don't want to say a holiday camp, because it's not a holiday camp, and they are humans. I mean, if you give them nothing, like some callers called up yesterday morning and talking about take this off them, don't give them anything. Well, you don't give them anything. My personal opinion and experience is you breed an animal. Because at some point, that person's going to get let out of that door, and you haven't given them anything. So they could not care
I don't think he
what
is.
someone says to them.
I don't think he is he?
No. Him, yeah, I don't think he'll probably end up dying in there. But even with him now, so say, for example, now, like people are saying he shouldn't get anything, should be locked in a room. At some point, that door's going to open, and the officer's going to be on the receiving end of whatever it is, because the hatred will just build up. Well, you're not giving him a TV, you're not giving him hot food, you're not giving him warm water. Eventually, there's no compliance from him.
Yeah, I'm not. I do see the point, and I'm not suggesting we do that at all, because I think that way we almost become less than ourselves if we behave like that towards. Having said that, you see, you've taken us right into the area that matters here, I think, because I can be, you can be, the authorities can be civilized, decent, make sure a person has access to a shower, a loo, books, their religious faith. We can do all of that and be extremely tough on them at the same time. Not by removing those things, but by saying, I'm afraid you have repeatedly shown yourself to be incapable of safely being in company, even if that company is one prison officer near you in a given day, and all company is now being removed from you because you are repeated. It's basic toddler treatment. You are showing you can't play with the other kids, go to the other room on your own and read a book, end of story. I mean, it is that basic. And I think you can still describe yourself as civilized and remove company from a person forever.
So those practices are in place where they do segregate or seclude prisoners away from the rest of the population. But then again, at some point, they try to reintegrate that person back in. Now, the question could be, do we just leave them there on the side? But what resources is that going to take? Is that bringing in a whole new team?
What do you mean, leave them on the side? What do you mean?
Leave them secluded, leave them segregated for the whole of their sentence. I don't think it's a long-term thing that'll work. I mean,
stick them with
with
like-minded people.
And how do you find that?
They're there. They're in the prison. Let them live the life they want to live. Let them live it. Go on. These people, these other murderers are your company. These other jihadists are your company. You're all in there. Far away. If you want to kill each other, but you're not killing me.
No. So I kind of agree with what you're saying. In the prison service, they don't do that. So they'll move jihadists, extremists, left-wing, right-wing, whatever you want to call them. So there'll only be a certain amount in each prison. They'll move them, and then every so often, every couple of years, they'll move them, so they can't get into the mind and radicalize others, and that's the way it works. However, like what you've just said, if they start moving people around, you're just moving the problem to somewhere else. He'll radicalize a few more people, then a few more people, then a few more people.
No, I'm not. No, you're giving him a freer run than I have imagined.
I'm not saying.
No, I know you're not, but I'm saying. No, I know you're not, but that scenario gives him a freer run to fraternize and change people's minds. I'm saying stick the worst with the worst, the ones who say no thank you to any rehabilitation, no thank you to any de-radicalization, rejecting any claim that what they've done is wrong, the people who still believe ideologically that killing children because you disagree with someone politically is okay. Stick them all in the same unit. Give them the nicest showers you can find.
It is a problem, however, and it's not a direct comparison, nowhere near. I mean, you see like gangs going in from, I don't know, all over the country for shooting, stabbings, drugs, whatever it is. When they do that, exactly what you've mentioned is put them together, it's the worst possible thing they can do. Because once they put them together, all they're doing is building stronger together. And when should we say, a riot or something potentially kicks off like it did many years ago in Birmingham, that's the problem they get then. And then you get, prisons start to get, you get the risk of, not escape, not to that extreme, but you get the risk of like the takeover of the certain wings, and then they're uprising. And I think unless you're putting people into the same unit that are never going to be released, I think it can work.
Okay, thank you very much, Oscar, for your observations from a position of some knowledge. Thank you, Oscar. In Birmingham, it's 1:50.
LBC this morning on Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
We must go to Birmingham now. How is this relatively new Labour government dealing with this strike in Birmingham? Well, not very well. It's now entering its second month. So let's bring in Sharon Graham, who's General Secretary of the relevant unit, Unite. How likely is this could spread?
If the council and the government keep aiding and abetting, and other councils, that workers pay the price for bad decisions, these low-pay workers cannot pay the price.
So it could spread, Sharon.
If other councils decide to make low-paid workers pay for bad decisions that they did not make, then absolutely, of course.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC.
I'm coming here. It's that time of year. Irresistible hot cross bun season. We've got loads of them. From richly fruited to chocolate and salted caramel and even apple crumble ones. All £1.50 for Co-op members. Now that's a proper tasty Easter. Co-op. Owned by you, right by you.
Non-members £2, ends 20th of April, subject to availability. Prices may vary. Co-op Group Food Stores only, £1 joining fee.
Car owners, you could be owed thousands in compensation. If you bought a car on finance from 2007 onwards, it may have been sold with hidden commissions. My Claim Group is working hard to help. So, even if you've forgotten your details, make sure you check. Text CLAIM to 86688. My Claim Group is authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Text CLAIM to 86688.
Claims made simple.
I've got the new Samsung Galaxy S25 and so many brownie points. You see, Now Brief with Galaxy AI learns my schedule to keep me ahead of my day. Weather, activity stats, and diary updates like Janie's birthday.
Oh, you remembered.
Thanks, Now Brief. Buy the Galaxy S25 on O2 by 4th of June and claim a Galaxy Chromebook Go worth £299. Selected languages only. Account login and network connection required. Claim a Galaxy Chromebook Go in Titan Grey from Samsung within 30 days of purchase. Terms apply.
Hello, I'm Gabby Logan.
And I'm Mark Chapman.
And we're the hosts of The Sports Agents,
a twice-weekly podcast exploring the biggest stories from the world of sport.
From the Premier League to the NFL, Formula One, soap opera to sports washing in boxing and tennis, you name it, The Sports Agents have got it covered.
We'll bring you behind the scenes at some of the greatest sporting events on the planet, and we'll be joined by the biggest names in the game.
New episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. Listen on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts.
Make the most of longer, warmer days with Halford's biggest ever Easter sale. We've got up to 50% off loads of motoring and cycling products, like dash cams, bikes, cycling accessories, and more. Pop into your local Halfords today. Halfords, keep on moving for less. Offers subject to availability, full T's and C's and exclusions apply. See halfords.com for details.
Tonight's Euro Millions jackpot is £34 million.
Now that calls for a dance.
Do I have to?
You can limbo. That's it.
With these moves, I might just hit the jackpot.
Very good.
Get that Euro Millions feeling tonight. Euro Millions from the National Lottery. Play on app. Estimated jackpot. Account terms, rules and procedures apply. Players must be 18 or over.
Sheila Fogarty on LBC.
This text here says, I did 6 years as a prison officer. Prisoners manipulate the situation. They will tick all the boxes to get on a governor's pet project list. All will go well as long as they keep saying yes. Anybody that's on the front line in the prison service listening to this will know exactly what I mean. Well, you see, I'm quite comfortable with that situation as long as said person doesn't use it as a reason, as a kind of cover for honing weapons and planning to kill people with them. I don't mind if they say yes to all the courses to have a slightly easier life in prison. Fine, they're doing the courses, great. I don't care if they mean it. It'd be great if they did, and I'm sure some of them do. But it's the not killing people thing that we're really focusing on here. Dale says most people aren't antisocial. It's people's material conditions that have declined over the last 15 years. That is why crime is going up. We need to raise the poor out of poverty, and then crime will drop and people won't feel the need to throw cooking oil all over someone. Dale, no question people have had a tough time. But if you think that the Abedi brothers' actions are connected to austerity, think again. This text here says, if Hashim Abedi isn't already criminally insane, the regime necessary to safeguard prison wardens will probably drive him insane. This is arguably inhuman and will cost a great deal. He was great deal of movement by the sounds of it. Anyway, I would argue that the logical and best solution is to reinstate... Oh, it gets tougher now. Is to reinstate capital punishment. That's Stephen. And this text here says, "Hi Sheila, the world has changed. Our society has changed. Crimes have changed. The nature of criminals has changed. We can no longer govern ourselves with 19th century ideas. Capital punishment needs to be brought back." Although, of course, capital punishment is indeed a 19th century idea and an 18th century idea and a 17th century idea. The list goes on. The lack of it is something of a 20th century idea, isn't it? Penny has called from Manchester. Hello, Penny.
Good afternoon.
You are the wife of a prison officer.
Yes. Yeah, my husband's been in the service for over 25 years.
So you worry, I guess.
Yeah, and my thoughts are, when we're talking about this, it's about those families that are at home with knowing that their loved ones are in hospital and they've been badly assaulted. You know, my husband's been assaulted, and it's so awful. And we don't think about these prison officers when they're first on the line.
Yeah, it's very hard. I mean, is it a constant worry for you?
You worry every day that you're going to get that phone call from the prison telling you that your partner is either on the way to hospital, in hospital, or something worse. It's every day.
And has your husband ever been assaulted?
Yeah, he was badly assaulted in 2020 during the COVID times, and I had that phone call, and it was really awful. The panic as you drive to the prison to meet the welfare officer. Yeah, awful.
Can I ask what happened?
Yes, he was just doing his job. The prisoners were out on association, which means they're all out on the landings. This young person was on the phone chatting to somebody. He refused to get off the phone. My husband asked him to get off the phone, and he was knocked unconscious. He was put into... he was thrown across the floor, basically.
And how badly hurt was he?
He thankfully had concussion, which thankfully...
Well, that can go in anyway. That can go in lots of directions, can't it? That kind of injury.
Yeah. He was off work for about 3 months, and he now suffers permanent memory issues as a result of the incident.
And he still works as a prison officer, does he?
Yeah, he loves his job, loves it. Yeah, even despite that, because it's working with the other prison officers, working a part of that team, and he does meet. There's some people in prison that aren't as bad as we think.
Yeah, well, listen, I'm very glad that it was a good outcome for you, or goodish anyway, Penny, if he's lost some memory. But not the worst outcome, but thankfully. Thanks to Penny in Manchester. Karen's called from Wigan. Hi, Karen.
Hiya, Sheila. First time caller.
You're very welcome.
My brother's a prison officer. He's been assaulted 3 times in the last 3 months. The last one was 6 weeks ago. He was on what's called a bed watch, where the prisoner was in hospital awaiting treatment. My brother was handcuffed to the prisoner on a chain, and he had one hand free. My brother was on with another prison officer, a lady, and the prisoner kept mithering and asking for cups of coffee. And my brother said, "No, I'm not here to make you cups of coffee. I'm here to watch you and get your treatment." And because my brother wouldn't make him a cup of coffee, it then went into a full assault, and it broke all my brother's fingers.
And what happened then?
The lady what was on with him had to run to the next ward. Luckily, there was another bed watch, and there were 2 more prison officers in that ward. She had to get one of the prison officers to come because he was on top of my brother. And he managed to get the prisoner off my brother. And they decided that he didn't need treatment after all. And they got the van and they took him back to the prison. And my brother had x-rays and it broke all his fingers.
Dear me, that is appalling. Thankfully, not fatal, but bad enough. Thank you very much, Karen. Karen in Wigan. Thanks to all of you called with real life experience from inside the prison system, either as a prison officer or former prison officer, or as you've heard in the last 2 calls there, the relatives of prison officers whose lives are very much at risk in many of our jails. Coming up after the news at 2, I want to focus on Hillsborough. It's 36 years to the day that the Hillsborough tragedy, an entirely avoidable tragedy, happened. And I want to focus as much on the people who died and their loved ones, but more than that, even, or equal to that, the Hillsborough law and why it is so important, not just to them, but to the whole country. 2 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 2 o'clock, workers at British Steel's plant in Scunthorpe have told us they are relieved. After the government took control of it over the weekend, the raw materials needed to keep the furnaces going have now arrived in the UK. Charlotte Brompton-Charles from the GMB union told LBC it's a big step forward.
It's certainly a huge relief. I mean, the intervention from the government on Saturday gave us all a bit of breathing room, but now to actually have the raw materials on site means I think everyone will sleep a bit sounder tonight.
The business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, has arrived in Immingham, where the materials have landed.
I want to say a huge thank you to all the staff of British Steel, all the people who have been involved in really pulling out the stops to make sure we've got that continuity of supply.
A man's pleaded guilty to murdering 2 women and attempting to kill 2 others in a Christmas Day stabbing in Milton Keynes. Jeswell Brown attacked 38-year-old Joanne Pearson and Tiona Grant, who was 24, at an address in Bletchley. The 49-year-old's lawyer says he's profoundly sorry. A 21-year-old man has died after being stabbed in South London. Emergency services were called out in Kennington last night. 5 men and 1 woman arrested on suspicion of murder remain in custody. Campaigner Sir Alan Bates has written to former sub-postmasters urging them to take the government to court over continued delays to compensation from the Horizon scandal. He believes it will be the quickest way to ensure fairness after missed deadlines. Last November, Sir Alan addressed the Commons Business Committee.
I think the bureaucracy of the whole thing is definitely a big problem. We don't seem to be getting very far forward. One of the things I've noticed is that ever since these schemes began, they've been shifting the goalposts.
Ministers say they're settling claims at a faster rate than ever and dispute Sir Alan's suggestions there won't be full settlements until 2027. There's a mystery over who felled a 400-year-old tree in a park in North London. The oak, which has a girth of more than 6 metres, was found lying in Whitewebs Park in Enfield last week. A preservation order has been placed on the stump of the tree, with councillors saying they're looking to find ways of growing it back. In the city, a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was trading up 68 points at 82.02. The pound buys $1.32 and €1.17. LBC weather: rain in the south. It will be most persistent in the southwest, dry in the north with sunny spells and a high of 18 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Tim Humphrey.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Sheila Fogarty.
Hello, good afternoon to you. It's 36 years to the day that the Hillsborough tragedy happened, and I'm conscious that depending on your age, that will have a greater or lesser significance, and obviously depending on your connection to the story, to those events, it will have a greater or lesser significance. Which is why this hour, as well as focusing on the people who lost their lives and their families and the battle that their families had for almost 30 years, well, yes, it was, well, it's ongoing really, because nobody's ever been brought to justice for it. The truth has come out, but nobody's been brought to justice for it. Why that matters not just to them, and not just to the city of Liverpool, and not just to the world of football, but to the whole country. What happened at Hillsborough and the subsequent fight for the truth and the ongoing fight for the law, the Hillsborough law, it is about the whole country. And the Hillsborough law, I think in particular, is, if you don't think it is about you, I urge you to listen very carefully this hour, because it very much is about you, me, and anyone who's alive now or who is to come in this country, because the Hillsborough law is about a very simple thing. It is about the relationship, the power relationship between the state and the individual citizen. And you only have to look at the Hillsborough story and listen foremost the families and the victims, but running through the injustice that followed, is a perfect illustration of the disgraceful power dynamic in this country between the individual citizen and the state. The state can lie, hide, cheat, change evidence for decades with the backing of arms of the state, arms of the media. It can and did and still does do all of that. It did it with Hillsborough. It's done it in different ways with the post office scandal, with other scandals as well. Infected blood, sodium valproate. They're all examples where the individual and the individual groups of families could be easily squashed and pushed to one side and lied about or dismissed by the state. And when those individuals challenge that version of events, the state's version of events, in the courts, typically, when they challenge them in the courts, it is a true David and Goliath scenario, because the state has very deep pockets and most of us don't. Sometimes it will be an example like Hillsborough, where a tragedy has happened, an avoidable tragedy has happened, lies have been told, injustice after injustice after injustice that has to be uncovered. And that takes huge amounts of time when the state isn't telling the truth, when the parties involved aren't telling the truth. It takes time, it takes money, it takes expensive lawyers. And the Hillsborough families fought and fought and fought, raised money every which way they could, relied on pro bono support from a lot of lawyers and journalists just refusing to give up on them. And the central ethos really behind the Hillsborough law is that nobody should have to do that. That where things go wrong or are carried out mistakenly, because it's not all about tragedies, but where things go wrong, let's put it that simply, where things go wrong, the state has a duty, a legal duty, to reveal truthfully what went wrong. They call it the duty of candor, but that's essentially what it means. Even recently, the IOPC investigating civil claims or investigating misconduct claims in public office against some of the Hillsborough police officers were concluded that they had no case to answer, that they couldn't be prosecuted in any way or disciplined in any way, because at the time of Hillsborough there was no duty upon them to tell the truth. Now, I don't know about you, but even in 1989 I thought police officers were meant to tell the truth, didn't you? Particularly when on their shift somebody died. 96 people died, 97 eventually. The idea that has to be legally binding, that an officer should tell the truth, and if they don't, they can kind of just get away with it, no matter what the consequences of the lie, is extraordinary. But it is our country. And Hillsborough is the kernel in which we can really illustrate this today. But it's not the only example. And that's why the Hillsborough law is so important. And I wanted to talk about it today because today is the anniversary of the tragedy, 36 years ago. It's hard to believe. And it's sort of woven through my entire journalistic career, that story. I was just about to start my journalism at the BBC when it happened, and I was doing some temping work at Radio Merseyside in Liverpool. And the story hit us in the face on the day. People came from that football ground to their local radio station, and to both local radio stations and to the Liverpool Echo offices. And this is all pre-mobile phones, it's pre-social media, and they wanted to be heard, they needed to be heard, because they knew already that they were being lied about on that day. So this is why the Hillsborough law is so important. And there is some suggestion that Keir Starmer, having committed during the election campaign to bring that bill into Parliament, is going cold on it in some way, or wanting to water it down in some way. We don't quite know what his plan is, what his thinking is. But my God, if he is, he's got to have a fight on his hands, as evidenced by the last 36 years. David Conn joins me, investigations correspondent at The Guardian, who reported on the Hillsborough disaster, has done ever since it happened. David, the whole question of the Hillsborough law, for people who aren't familiar with it, give us a bit on its incarnation.
Yeah, well, it's actually two very simple proposals for what the law would be. And that this law has actually been drafted since 2017 So it's not just like a call for certain reforms or proposals to come in. There's literally a draft law that has been written by a barrister called Pete Weatherby, KC, who is one of the leading barristers for the Hillsborough families, a very, very senior barrister who's represented other families at other massive major inquiries and inquests like the Manchester Arena bombing, and currently at the COVID inquiry on behalf of thousands of people who lost their relatives during the pandemic. And this is the family's legacy to the ordeal that they suffered due to Hillsborough and due to the disaster 36 years ago today, and as you've been describing, the ordeal through of the police false case that was made, trying to avoid their own responsibility, and the failures of the legal system to hold people to account. So the first measure is the duty of candour that you've just been explaining, which is that not just police, but all public officials will have a legal duty to it's not just be honest in response, but it's also to positively assist in the establishing of the truth as part of their duties and responsibilities, but obviously particularly where there's a major incident or a major issue that concerns, as you say, the state or the government or the emergency services. And the second one is your David and Goliath point, which is that bereaved families at inquiries and inquests should have the funding, legal aid funding, for lawyers and legal representation on an equal basis to the public authorities who are also going to be sitting in that inquiry. And that was one of the things that really shocked me all those years ago when I first started reporting on it and talking to families, when they said there was no legal aid for them for the first Hillsborough inquest and also for the public inquiry. And after this disaster where they'd lost their loved ones, and it wasn't just young people, some of them lost their parents, they lost the actual breadwinner, the person earning the money in the family. They had to basically find families to put it's about £3,000 each from memory into a pot to be able to afford a legal team with, I think, one barrister. So this is quite a simple two proposals which the families have absolutely adhered to as the legacy that they want. And as you say, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party have promised over actually quite a long period of time now, a few years now, to introduce it.
There is nothing controversial about this law, it seems to me. And, I mean, clearly some people, when they mess up to the detriment of other people, it's human nature to go, oh, God, what have I done? And hope, God, it goes away. That's human nature. But all kinds of laws are there to make sure that human nature isn't the only thing that leads us, that sometimes justice has to lead us, and an inquiry into, an investigation into what happened has to lead us.
Yeah, and the legal duty, Sheila, would be for misleading. The legal sanction, making it a criminal offence, would be for misleading the public. So that's the proposal.
Again, not remotely controversial, I don't think.
Well, I mean, most people, when you talk about it, have the same reaction that you were describing at the start, which is it's really hard to believe that there isn't a duty of candour already. That you actually have to bring in a law to bring in the duty of candour. But that's, again, so that in itself is what makes it so disappointing and, to be honest, quite approaching shocking, really, that somehow, because Starmer promised in his conference speech last year, which was in Liverpool, that one of the first things he would do if they won the election, he became Prime Minister, was to introduce Hillsborough law by today, by the next anniversary of the disaster, which is today. And they haven't done it. They've had to write to the families to say, Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, and Nick Thomas-Symonds, I think it's Cabinet Office Minister, another minister, have had to write to the families to say, we know we're going to be breaking that promise. Because as they've come to actually implement it, and as they've seen the whites of the eyes of these proposals that they've been promising to introduce for years, it seems like civil servants or, within Whitehall, people have been looking at it saying, hang on a minute, what are the full implications of this? And started to worry that somehow everything that they do, they're going to be criminal. They're going to be worried about committing a criminal offence with everything that they say, and that there's wider implications than were considered before. And to be honest, it has infuriated people who've been involved with the campaign for all these years.
I mean, you know what I'm hearing when you describe that, their fears. What you're talking about, the establishment's fears, and I don't often talk in terms of the establishment because it's an ever-changing thing, the establishment, isn't it? In some respects, anyway. But this to me sounds like the establishment, capital T, capital E, doing precisely what it did from April the 15th, 1989 onwards, which is to say, this could be tricky for us. This could be tricky for us.
And that's exactly where Labour and Keir Starmer not only said they weren't going to be, but said they were going to bring in this law to reform that. And there was a briefing given to the media, I think it's the week before last now, that somebody, one of these kind of like officials are concerned that sort of briefing, that a civil servant who tells a white lie to his boss for why he was late to work could be committing a criminal offence, right? And that has absolutely infuriated, that particular detail of the briefing has absolutely infuriated people involved with who've developed Hillsborough law and who've called for it for all these years, because it simply wouldn't do that.
No.
It's about misleading the public. Yeah. It's not about telling a white lie to your boss because you came in 10 minutes. And for somebody to have briefed that to the media as if to say, oh, they don't know what they're bringing in here and it's all naive and it's too broad. Yeah. I mean, that has really infuriated people. And now we've gone from a promise, Sheila, to a mess. It's now a mess. A deadline's been something they've been promising to bring in. A deadline's been broken. A promise by this anniversary. Like to promise something by something as emotive and awful and traumatic as the anniversary, where you say, but by the next anniversary, we're going to do this thing that you want as your legacy. To miss that and end up in this mess of, well, I think we need to have a more of a look at. And now they're saying they're going to do more consultation.
What you said there about the white lie, I mean, to even dare to try to equate somebody saying, oh, sorry, the cat ate my dinner, to their boss is the same as scores of police officers changing their statements that they'd given on the day, evidence being hidden, evidence being destroyed, stupid cut-off points being given in the individual inquests. In the original inquests, no individual inquests, no second set of inquests until 2016, nobody jailed, a refusal to release the papers until that Andy Burnham moment, the independent panel, the apology from Cameron eventually in the Commons, then the jury inquests that came to the full truth, but no justice ever. To equate that litany of injustice to a white lie to your boss is an affront, isn't it?
Just one other thing that I want to say, though, is that when you were talking at the beginning about why it's so needed, Hillsborough law, because the police mounted a false narrative where after the disaster, instead of accepting responsibility that their own mismanagement of the crowd at the semi-final had caused this terrible crush, and instead they tried to blame the victims themselves, the people who'd gone to watch the football match, and make all sorts of allegations of misbehaviour that, as you said, took 27 years to finally demolish in the legal process, right? But I think that another element of huge reason for the injustice and for how long it's taken, and it's the same with all the other examples that you were mentioning, is the legal system. And although, of course, if there was a duty of candour and there was equal funding, I mean, you said, and we both said, that if there was equal funding, it addresses the David and Goliath issue. But the David and Goliath comparison implies that then it would be a level playing field, that the court system is completely fair. So if you have equality of representation, you will get justice. But one huge feature of this is that you were mentioning the first inquest. That first inquest, which was a verdict of accidental death, where all these police stories were heard in great detail and allegations of drunkenness and so on, that verdict was in 1991. There was then, in effect, an appeal to the High Court, which was turned down in 1993. So the courts upheld the first inquest in 1993. And despite all the campaigning by the families, by the survivors, by the supporters, by so many people, and you're talking about an institution as powerful and high profile as Liverpool Football Club also supporting. So it's a high profile campaign. It does not get overturned, that inquest, until 2012, nearly 19 years. So the stubbornness and intransigence of the legal system, when there are these campaigns for justice that say, look, in common sense terms, you're upholding the police blaming the victims for this disaster. You're upholding that all these other elements that you've just talked about, Sheila. And if it hadn't been for the intervention by Andy Byrne and the Hillsborough Independent Panel, which was a non-legal process, they had to find a political process to get, if you like, a report, to get
things moving.
And then coverage, and then, as you said, there was an apology by the Prime Minister in Parliament, and then the inquest was quashed 3 months later, and I sat there in court. It took an hour and a half, and it was all quite a jolly atmosphere, and I thought, wow, this has now happened in record time. But these families have been fighting, making the exact same points
again and again
for 19 years, and the legal system wouldn't budge.
And what you haven't mentioned in there, and I think it's important to do so, is the Taylor report, the Lord Justice Taylor report that came, a year or so after Hillsborough, found pretty much, there were additional things found, but not many more, what the independent panel found 20-odd years later.
Exactly. So it was actually 4 months later, believe it or not, Sheila. It was August 1989.
There was an interim report, then the full report, wasn't there?
Yeah. And in the interim report, that was about the cause of the disaster.
Yeah.
And he saw through the South Yorkshire Police case.
And found the fans blameless.
The disaster caused by mismanagement. And he actually criticised the police for making that case. But they still went to the inquest and all the other legal proceedings and made the case again. So we have these public inquiries, which have now become, that lasted just a few months, but they now take years and years and go on and on. But even if they come to the right decision, they don't have any legal force.
Okay, David, I have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for your thoughts and your reminiscences on it. David Conn, investigations correspondent at The Guardian. I'll talk more with you in just a moment. It's 2:23.
Tom Swarbrick from 4 p.m.
An exclusive this afternoon, the local authority that offered to Birmingham City Council to pick up some of the 17,000 tonnes of rubbish that was snubbed. We'll look at why. The NHS psychiatrist who says that mental health is far too overdiagnosed. And what's in a name? Why are young British women turning against taking their husband's surname?
Tom Swarbrick from 4 p.m. Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC.
Nothing beats a Jet2 holiday. And if you're looking for somewhere different this summer, look no further than Bulgaria. Escape the crowds on Irakli Beach. Experience local cuisine in the charming Nesibar Old Town. Or uncover incredible ancient ruins. Book Bulgaria now and get 22 kilograms of baggage included. Jet2 Holidays. Package holidays you can trust. ABTRA National Protected. Subject to availability and conditions.
Right now, you can get hearing devices from only £495 at Specsavers. Now, we know what you're thinking. Oh, if they're that cheap, they're bound to be those big old-fashioned ones that do this kind of thing. As well as this kind of thing. But actually, they just do this kind of thing. Clear sound from a piece of text so small you can barely see it. All from only £495. So book a free hearing check at Specsavers now, because OK hearing is not OK. Terms and conditions apply. See our website for details.
The advert looked genuine. A post from a household name, experts in money, a hot opportunity. They asked for a small amount, promised a great return, took all I had, and then disappeared. Investment scammers are highly sophisticated, and every month, CEL talk to thousands of people like you who've fallen victim. Our experts can help recover your money, so head to celsolicitors.co.uk today.
CEL. Here at Pets in a Pickle, our name has caused some confusion. We've had people asking us what pickles we recommend, and a lovely lady looking for a pickle costume for her pet. But they've all been barking up the wrong tree. We actually offer simple, fuss-free pet insurance policies for cats and dogs, including unlimited access to video consultations with First Vet. So, for pet insurance policies as unique as they are, visit petsinApickle.co.uk. For actual pickles, try the supermarket.
Sheila Fogarty on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Ben has texted to say, I'm on my way to the memorial now, Sheila. I live 10 minutes away. If Starmer does try to slow down or not implement the Hillsborough law, he'll soon have to back down, according to Ben. Just before I hear from Dave in Ealing, just a word here on a news story from today that I think connects well to this conversation about the Hillsborough law. So Alan Bates, he of Post Office scandal fame, he is urging victims of that scandal today to take the government to court over compensation delays. He said they could be waiting until 2027 for their claims to be settled. That is a forecast that the government disputes, but he's telling them it's time to go to court. And it's a perfect example of the kind of inequality that existed between the state and the people involved. And I think that point that David Conn, my guest, made about the very nature of the justice system, the legal system, it is a really important one as well. And I'm going to use an example, and I know she won't mind me using it. Fellow broadcaster, friend of mine, Kay Adams, she took the HMRC to tribunal, or her case went to tribunal, over the way she was, over a decision they had made about many broadcasters and other freelancers on the nature of their tax status. She took them to tribunal at her own cost. They, of course, are using yours and my money, taxpayers' money, to hire some of the most expensive barristers in London to do their work for them in these tribunals. Kay won in her first tribunal, and HMRC appealed. Kay won in that second hearing, HMRC appealed. Kay won in her third hearing, HMRC appealed, and Kay won in, I think, her fourth and final hearing. And then HMRC, after hounding her for a decade, sent a terse, short email saying, I can't remember the exact detail of what it said, but it was essentially, we won't be appealing this one. There was no sense of an apology, no sense of you were right, or she's expected to pay the costs, by the way, of each of those cases. And it was an example of the state, an arm of the state, hounding an individual. And the reason they appealed and appealed and appealed and appealed, and they, by the way, they didn't even hide this. They said explicitly they wanted to make examples of some people to put other people off challenging them. Now, last time I checked, making examples of people isn't part of the justice system. Making an example of somebody so nobody else does X, Y, or Z. Aren't we meant to look at the evidence? Aren't we meant to look at the truth? That word again, the truth. But that's a perfect example of an individual being hounded by the state. And the reason they came back and came back and came back and came back and appealed and appealed and appealed, even though she kept winning, is they wanted her to give up. They wanted to bully her into submission. And again, very different case and much more serious because it involves people's lives, is the Hillsborough case. At every turn, the state, the law, the authorities, the government of the day was saying to the Hillsborough families and to the the city of Liverpool and to anyone who knew the truth about Hillsborough, nothing more to see here. Move along now. People would constantly ask me, when are those Scousers going to shut up moaning about Hillsborough? And I remember having conversations with fellow journalists who had that attitude. And I would say, well, be careful what you wish for, because what those moaning Scousers are doing is insisting that the citizen is not a serf to be crushed underfoot. Sadly, in the case of Hillsborough, literally crushed underfoot. That we aren't serfs. We're not supposed to be serfs. We're citizens. And the Hillsborough law is about strengthening the citizen in the face of misconduct by the state. Anyone who doesn't want that, in my mind, is declaring themselves to choose serfdom over citizenship. Why would you do that? 0345 6060 973. It's 2:31. Let's get the headlines from Tim Humphrey.
Steel supplies are making their way from Immingham Port in Lincolnshire to Scunthorpe, where they will keep blast furnaces going for a few more weeks. The UK government put in the order, paid for out of existing budgets. The business secretary was at the port to see the supplies come ashore. A 43-year-old man's been arrested on suspicion of murder after a man died in an explosion at a house in Nottinghamshire. David Howard was recovered from the debris and workshop on Saturday. One of London's biggest and oldest oak trees has been chopped down, but nobody knows how or why. Enfield Council says it's treating what happened in Whitewebs Park earlier this month as criminal damage and have reported it to the police. LBC weather, rain in the south. It will be most persistent in the southwest, dry in the north with sunny spells and a high of 18 degrees.
This is LBC.
It must be hard work being an Easter bunny. All that joy to spread, all those eggs to hide, and they're paid absolute carrots. Thankfully this year, M&S have a whole team of adorable chocolate animals to help lighten the load. There's Flossie, the Easter Highland cow, Ralph, the Easter Cavapoo, even Shaggy, the Easter Shetland pony. Very helpful and very delicious. These are not just Easter eggs, these are M&S Easter eggs, subject to availability.
A Minecraft movie has arrived in McDonald's Happy Meal. Help your little ones build their own adventure. Explore the overworld and meet exciting new friends. Some fun, some food, it's all inside this Happy Meal. Until 6th of May from 11 a.m. Includes one pre-selected book or toy. While stocks last, fair ordering policy applies. See mcdonalds.co.uk/Happy Meal.
Car owners, you could be owed thousands in compensation. If you bought a car on finance from 2007 onwards, it may have been sold with hidden commissions. My Claim Group is working hard to help. So, even if you've forgotten your details, make sure you check. Text CLAIM to 86688. My Claim Group is authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Text CLAIM to 86688.
Claims made simple. Hey, Dad.
Hey, love. Just spoke to Zara from St James's Place.
Your financial advisor?
Yeah, we've made a plan. Retire early, travel more. Peru first.
Ooh, como estas?
Bless you. And Zara's plan means I can help more with your house deposit.
Thanks again, Dad.
Planning for the future calls for invaluable advice. Visit St James's Place to find your one-to-one financial advisor. St James's Place Wealth Management PLC is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. SJP approved 19th of Feb 25.
Here, Sandra, listen to this email. Felicitations and unalloyed joy to you. Could you help with a small inconvenience? I possess $32 million in an account belonging to my father, the Prince. We need an honest person to bank this amount for us. We're quits in, babe.
Some things are too good to be true. The Specsavers Too Good deal isn't. Get 2 pairs of glasses for £70. Include single vision lenses to the same prescription. Conditions apply. Ask in store for details.
Quits in.
For simple, fuss-free pet insurance policies for cats and dogs, visit petsinappickle.co.uk. For actual pickles, try the supermarket.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC with Sheila Fogarty. Text 84850.
I will throughout the next hour or so, because I suspect we'll talk about this after 3, given that it's quite late before we actually got talking about it together. I will dot our calls with stories from Hillsborough to moments in those 30 years that I think you should know about if you don't already know about them. Just to remind you of what, it might sound a bit silly me saying if you choose not to care about the Hillsborough law, you choosing to choose serfdom over citizenship. I believe that to my bones. If you think the Hillsborough law is only about Hillsborough, you're wrong. If you think the Hillsborough law does not apply to you, you're wrong, and your children and your grandchildren, because it is about your strength in the face of state abuse or state error or state lying. It is about you being strengthened in the face of those moments, should those moments happen to you, and God forbid they do. But you've seen from cases like Hillsborough, sodium valproate, blood scandal, infected blood scandal, post office, it happens to anyone. It doesn't just happen to particular people, it happens to anyone. It can happen to anyone. And the reason I say serfdom over citizenship is what's at stake here. Here's an example for this half hour. Anne Williams, now the late Anne Williams, her son died at Hillsborough, was unlawfully killed at Hillsborough. In the original inquests, he, along with the other 96 who died at the time, were lumped together as one entity in those inquests. The cut-off point for considering any evidence was 3:15, so just minutes after the disaster, really. Even though Anne Williams knew from the woman who had been with her son as he died that he died much later than 3:15, and therefore could have been saved. Arguably at the time, she said could have been saved, and then in light of the full Hillsborough Independent Panel, which looked fully at the papers relating to Hillsborough, it was established that tens of people could have been saved of those 90 plus that died, had the safety been in place and the proper emergency care been in place. That wasn't, because the authorities at every level, police, the club, the local authorities, the ambulance service, the health, the regional health service, all got it wrong. And then lied to cover up getting it wrong. And she had every right as a mother to want to know the specifics of how and why her son died. Every person who lost somebody at Hillsborough had every right to know the specifics of why their loved one died and how they died. Can you imagine? Think about it. Can you imagine for a second somebody saying to you, look, I know your son's dead, but we're really not going to look into the how and the why. He's dead, you can't bring him back. Oh, by the way, also at the same time, some other authorities, the police and some newspapers, The Sun, are lying about your child being drunk when they died, lying about your child picking the pockets, and other people's children picking the pockets of the dead, lying about them being responsible for the crush, lying about everything to do with the death of your child. That is what happened repeatedly, over and over and over and over again in Hillsborough. People were told lie after lie after lie, and people were told up close and personal, your child, your husband, your sister, your brother, your wife, your granddad does not matter. No individual inquest. They don't matter. That is the state treating you like a nameless serf. So if you want to be a nameless serf into the future of this century in our country, great, ignore the Hillsborough law. But if you want to be a citizen with rights and with strengths in the face of an abusive state, if and when that happens, support the Hillsborough law. It's that simple. That is the choice. That is the choice. And I'm going to be really curious to see precisely what Keir Starmer, who knows the law and has a legal mind, what he will do with this. And I hope that back and forth and slowness and obstructive element that can happen in the legal system isn't running through him like a stick of rock on this one, because he will lose it. He will lose it. Dave's called from Ealing. Hello, Dave.
Hello, Sheila. I just want to echo what you've just said, actually. Everything you've just said just now and everything you've just said prior to the news break. And I think, actually, if I may, I'd like to pay tribute to you, because when other people in your profession turned away and did worse, pointed fingers and told lies and amplified those lies, you always stood for the truth and the justice that those who lost their lives and their families deserve, back then and now.
But, Dave, I couldn't do anything else. I wouldn't want to do anything else, but the reason I couldn't...
lots of them did.
Yeah, but the reason I couldn't do anything else is on the day it happened, and remember, this is pre-mobile phones, pre-social media. On the day it happened, when I went to Radio Merseyside around 4 o'clock to find out more about what was happening and then didn't get home for days, that evening, people were coming from Hillsborough to tell us what had happened and to tell us they were being lied about and to tell us about the blood being taken from children to see if they were drunk. They were telling us that on the day it happened. So how could you then listen to the police account with these fanciful suggestions that fans had just decided they owned the stadium, they were going to get in, they didn't care about their fellow fans. They were the only people saving lives on the day.
Yep. Yep.
How you could ignore that. And also, Dave, you won't forget, but this happened live on television.
And that actually is to my point, Sheila. I've been a Liverpool supporter for the best part, despite my accent, I've been a Liverpool supporter for the best part of 50 years.
Yeah.
I was actually due to go to that game, and I was a young man. I was 18 years old, so that ages me. But for a twist of fate and a work situation, I ended up not going. Mm-hmm. And I watched that tragedy unfold live on Grandstand on that day.
Yeah.
And I'm also a Labour member, and I've never in my adult life voted for anybody other than the Labour Party. And I am telling you now, and I don't know, who knows who listens to your show, hopefully the right people. I'm telling you now, as a Labour member and a lifelong Labour voter, if this does not go through and pass into law as was promised, I will rip up my membership and I will never, ever vote for that party again.
Well, we're not there yet. I don't know exactly
what... And we best never get there.
Well, I hope not. I don't know what Keir Starmer's response is going to be to those civil servants who are saying this is risky for ordinary civil servants. Well, do your job right then. Do your job right then. Don't lie when something goes wrong then.
How's about don't lie to your boss? Yeah. You know what I mean? They're worried about lying to their boss if they're late for... Well, I'll tell you what, try not to be late, and if you are, don't lie about it. There you go, there's the answer to that problem.
Exactly. And, we've all got jobs where... there's jeopardy in my job. There's jeopardy every time I open my mouth, which is why I think when I open my mouth, because of the law and because of decency and seemliness and because of Ofcom and all those things. Of course, Absolutely. We all have to think about things like that. The idea that civil servants are somehow a special case is precisely what allowed the police, civil servants in a different way, to think they could change their statements retrospectively.
Yep.
And break the law. And, of course, it worked for them in the law. I mean, they've been disgraced. The truth is out. They're despicable. But none of them went to prison. None of them has a stain on their name professionally.
Yeah, exactly.
It's extraordinary.
Exactly.
And do you think, Dave, that people understand, not just about Hillsborough, but understand how weak we are in the face of the state coming down on us?
Personally, yes, I do. In general, I'm not sure. You only have to look at what's gone on since Hillsborough, with all those particular events that you've mentioned, post office scandal, blood scandal, Windrush, etc., etc.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to nudge the dial.
Birmingham
really,
6, let's not, throw them into the mix as well.
Yeah. All that. Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't seem to nudge the dial fully. I do wonder sometimes whether it's a case of, unless you're personally impacted or affected, you don't always recognise the potential consequences for yourself in any given situation, in any given moment. And that may be at the heart of what's going on. But I know in terms of Hillsborough, I'll tell you now, you know as well as I do what the background to it was and how the situation was manipulated, etc., and how lies were told and all that.
Yeah.
People close ranks. Those in authority close ranks. And it's a very, very difficult thing to break down those. my personal opinion, I'm not convinced if that had been any other football club, what we're seeing now would have happened. That's my honest opinion.
You mean the fight wouldn't have been the same?
I don't think, maybe Everton. You know, maybe Everton, because obviously being where they're based. But I genuinely, I believe, but for the heart and backbone and desire for the truth from those people from your city, I'm not sure that would have been the same in every other instance, Sheila, to be quite frank.
You will remember the Andy Burnham moment in the 20th anniversary, I presume.
Oh, yes, I do. I do indeed.
Were you at Anfield for that by any chance?
No, I wasn't, no. Well,
I was at Anfield doing live commentary on that, because it was due to be the final anniversary, wasn't it? The final full anniversary service at Anfield that year. Yeah, and it was a big one. And I think that spirit that you're describing amongst the fans, particularly the fans and the families, you know, it's there in the city without a doubt, but let's focus on the fans and the family. The moment Andy Burnham read that statement from Gordon Brown that essentially said, I feel your pain today, but I'm sorry we can't release the papers, the Hillsborough papers, just yet. And, and that event turned from a memorial service into a political rally and then back to a memorial service. And the political rally moment came when a man who was sitting about 10 feet from me in the stands, you remember it, he just bellowed, I won't swear because he did, but he bellowed across Anfield and his voice just carried across Anfield. He just bellowed, "You're the effing government," but he said the full word, you know?
I remember it.
And then the fans started to sing Justice for the 96, and they didn't stop singing it for minutes on end.
They didn't.
And to his credit, Andy Burnham took that away and sorted it, you know. But in terms of getting the papers released and the independent Hillsborough panel created and all of that, which was the key thing. It was that moment, that man shouting, "You're the effing government," was it was almost like he was an angel sent from God that day to just get it done. You know, unlock this nonsense. And I think this point around the Hillsborough law, this is another unlock this nonsense moment for the whole country, not just for Hillsborough fans, not just for Liverpool people or football fans. It's unlock this nonsense where you, the citizen, are like an ant if the state decides you are. Don't stand for that.
Absolutely.
That's it, isn't it? That's what the Hillsborough law is saying.
It is.
You know, we're not ants to be crushed underfoot, and anyone who doesn't really pay attention to that Hillsborough law, that's what you're giving up. You're giving up the chance to have that strength in the face of the state, and no wonder it's the Whitehall people saying, "Oh, hang on a sec, this could be risky for us," because that's where the power lies. That's where the power lies at times like this. And it shouldn't. Not exclusively. You know, there's no harm in having power in Whitehall, but not exclusively. Thank you, Dave. Dave in Ealing. It's 2:48.
Tom Swarbrick from 4 p.m.
An exclusive this afternoon, the local authority that offered to Birmingham City Council to pick up some of the 17,000 tonnes of rubbish that was snubbed. We'll look at why. The NHS psychiatrist who says that mental health is far too overdiagnosed. And what's in a name? Why are young British women turning against taking their husband's surname?
Tom Swarbrick from 4 p.m. Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC.
Combine your pensions with PensionBee and take control of your retirement. Because when your pension is in a good place, you're in a good place. When investing, your capital is at risk.
Did you know you can get Santander Cycles for 24 hours for £3.50? I spent the day feeling the morning breeze. Rolling with mates. Keep up! Free wheeling!
For £3.50, you can get 24 hours of unlimited 60-minute rides on Santander Cycles. Download the Santander Cycles app to find your nearest docking station. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters. Pedal bikes only. Additional charges apply for e-bikes. Other T's and C's apply.
Forks at the ready. This Easter, Lidl won't be beaten on price. On our luscious leg of lamb from $6.15 per kilo. Or XXL juicy joint of British beef from $5.65 per kilo. Now that's big on quality and always Lidl on price. On sale from April 14th and price match in most major UK supermarkets until the 19th. Lidl.co.uk/spend less while stocks last.
I've got the new Samsung Galaxy S25 and so many brownie points. You see, Now Brief with Galaxy AI learns my schedule to keep me ahead of my day. Weather, activity stats, and diary updates like Janie's birthday.
Oh, you remembered.
Thanks, now brief. Buy the Galaxy S25 on O2 by 4th of June and claim a Galaxy Chromebook Go worth £299. Selected languages only. Account login and network connection required. Claim a Galaxy Chromebook Go in Titan Grey from Samsung within 30 days of purchase. Terms apply.
Angela Rippon, what are you doing here?
I've come to tell you about using energy flexibly, Albert.
Flexibly?
Yes, smart meter owners could get rewarded for moving their energy use, like doing the laundry at off-peak times.
So I don't need to do the splits?
No, Albert. Nobody wants to see that.
Get rewarded for using energy flexibly, only with a smart meter. Search Get a Smart Meter today.
Eligibility and availability vary. Consumer action required. Reward schemes and tariffs available to selected customers from selected suppliers.
Discover your Kia EV in our award-winning electric range. Explore the compact SUV, the EV3, UK Car of the Year 2025. Experience the sporty crossover, the EV6, or drive in comfort with the 7-seater SUV, the EV9, last year's UK Car of the Year. Order by the 30th of June to get 3.9% APR representative across our electric range. Search Discover your Kia EV. Kia. Movement that inspires. T's and C's apply. Kia Finance.
Leading Britain's conversation. Sheila Fogarty. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
John has called from Liverpool to carry on our conversation about the Hillsborough law on what is the 36th anniversary of the Hillsborough disaster. Hi, John.
Hi, Sheila. First, I just want to say what a fantastic representation you've made on the whole topic again, really. But I think that the delay in the Hillsborough law shows a complete lack of respect, not only to the families and the survivors, but also to those families from Grenfell and all the other tragedies which have happened where we've known that the governments have covered up. I think it's
and it's not just government; it's other public bodies as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
In both cases, Grenfell and Hillsborough.
Yeah, it's the establishment. I mean, people always forget the Football Association never issued an apology for Hillsborough for the ground not having a safety certificate.
And John, I don't know how old you are, but the week leading up to Hillsborough, I was working at Radio Merseyside, just temping. I was about to start my journalism training, and I remember every day when I'd come in, I'd hear the Roger Phillips phone in. Roger was a great broadcaster there and central to the families and that campaign over the years. But I remember hearing loads of Liverpool fans ringing in saying, oh, God, that ground is a liability. Why have they given us that ground and giving us this number of tickets? And it's dangerous. There was nearly a crush there a couple of years ago. And da-da-da. And I remember them saying it and just I don't know, just noting it in my head, And then when a week later this happened, it was just like, oh, my God. In the very same way that in Grenfell, residents' letters were ignored, weren't they?
Yeah, and that's it. I mean, there was a semi-final. I think Tottenham played Wolves a few years earlier, and the fans had to climb over and sit at the side of the pitch. But ultimately, I think this law needs to be passed properly. I mean, Keir Starmer actually come to Liverpool and said he'd never speak to the Sun, and he went back on that. So I think everyone will be watching with bated breath to see what the announcements are regarding the law.
Do you think? I mean, in Liverpool, you'll know, John. There's a kind of spirit that's there's a lot anti-establishment anyway, isn't there? In the city of Liverpool, that I think that's sometimes a great thing. I don't think it's always a great thing, but it's sometimes a great thing. It certainly was in relation to their response to Hillsborough, that's for sure. But do you think the rest of the country, or large parts of the country, are a bit passive in the face of state bullying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, unfortunately, it's only when, tragedies happen, people realise how the establishment can close ranks. I think Liverpool's sort of background, whether, in terms of the Irish history, and also, certainly since Margaret Thatcher was, I was only a child then, but when Margaret Thatcher came to power, and there's been things about the managed decline and all those types of things.
But even before that, the Labour small L Labour movement, the trade union movement. I mean, when I say that, that was all very key in shaping the city, wasn't it?
And I think that ultimately the dignity which the likes of Anne Williams shown in leading that. And it's, you know, every time that the family's views were put across, it was always done in a dignified manner. Yes. And ultimately, you know, the likes of Norman Betterson being knighted after the way he spoke to the families when he met them, I think it's just a big two fingers up to the family, and it constantly shows that the establishment didn't have any care in terms of the families, and not, as again, not just the Hillsborough families, but it's happened in the post office and in Windrush and in countless other.
Grenfell, yeah, as you mentioned. But the business of closing ranks, even before the lying and the closing
Galaxy A56 5G. Awesome. Her prehistoric old phone that needed charging every hour. Not awesome. But now she's got a long-lasting battery, epic camera, and massive screen. Maximum awesome. Get all the awesome tech and none of the dinosaur phone issues with Galaxy A56 5G. Buy before 15th of April and claim a silicone case, 45-watt super fast charger, and Black Galaxy Fit 3. Bonus awesome. Claim from Samsung within 30 days of purchase. T's and C's apply.
Sheila Fogarty on LBC. Call 0345 6060973.
Roger Phillips, my guest just a moment ago, mentioned Bishop James Jones, former Bishop, Anglican Bishop of Liverpool, I should say. He chaired, just to give you some context, he was the chair of the Hillsborough Independent Panel. This was a panel that was put in place, separate to the government, separate to other authorities. It was a fully independent panel. And the range of people on it was extraordinary. Chaired by a bishop. There were expert archivists on it because they were going through thousands upon thousands of papers and documents about what happened at Hillsborough and the legalities subsequently and all of the events subsequently. So there was him. There were archivists. Peter Sissons, the journalist, he was on it. There were people with knowledge of stadium design and just everything about it was expert. But more than that, it was the spirit of it and the tone of it that was different. It wasn't political and it wasn't legal. It was an independent panel of experts looking at these events and the events surrounding them since. And that, to me, it says that politics and the law, or the legal system to be precise, had failed these people, had failed these families and victims who could never come back and whose names had been besmirched as they died. So politics failed them up until that point. I think it was beginning to succeed at that point. The legal system had failed them. And so an entirely different incarnation was needed, an entirely different type of body of people was needed to take a fresh look at everything. A look that wasn't infected, and I use that word again, infected with the defensiveness and the secrecy of our state. And we do tell ourselves, and I do it, I like living in this country. We tell ourselves a very positive story about our country, and on many fronts we absolutely should. But I'm afraid there is a little part of darkness in the middle of it too, which is the defensiveness and the secrecy of the state when it comes to when the state is challenged. And that has to stop. It has to stop for the babies and mothers that died in the maternity scandals. It has to stop for the babies who had their organs flushed out, the dead babies who had their organs flushed out of their bodies without their parents knowing. It has to stop for the Windrush people. It has to stop for the Grenfell families, for the infected blood scandals, for the victims of sodium valproate. You name it, the list goes on. And the Hillsborough law is the thing that will not necessarily stop it, but will impede it. It will impede those people who will lie and shapeshift to get out of responsibility for harming people in their role in the state. And the onus, in the law, the onus will be placed on those bodies, the NHS, schools, the government, Whitehall, all kinds of public institutions and public bodies. The onus is on them not just to tell the truth when someone investigates them, but to actively assist in revealing what went wrong. It shouldn't be that difficult. It shouldn't be so difficult that we have to make a law, a criminal law, to make people do it. But there we are. We have endless evidence that that's what we need. So if Keir Starmer turns his back on this, he's going to be challenged very, very powerfully, and I will be at the front of the queue, frankly, challenging him, because this is about what you want modern Britain to be. And if Labour in power wants to be, and I can see signs that it is in some respects, if it wants to be a government leading the country into the 21st century, into the new century, into the modern world, the world of AI, the changing technologies, the changing global patterns, the climate change, you name it. If it wants
been served. But what made me call is just to talk about the sort of general principles which you've also touched on, which also applies to other scandals like the post office and all those things. And I don't know enough about the Hillsborough law to be sure about this, but to my mind, A, it's essential for all the reasons you've outlined, but B, it needs to provide for these public bodies not marking their own homework, and not not being the ones to decide whether they themselves have done something wrong. Because some of the time, like the HMRC example you gave earlier, they're just kind of running the clock down and running the money to kind of crush the little guy kind of thing. But also lots of the time they're trying to protect their reputation. And that's why I think it's important that we somehow make provision for people not to investigate themselves, because the temptation to preserve your reputation at the cost of the truth is too high.
Yes. And the whole question of the law being the Hillsborough law, it's not complicated. This is why I find it so surprising that it's
It should be controversial.
Yeah, it's not complicated. Yeah. It says if your organisation or you mess up to in a serious way that has harmed somebody, you have to actively assist in explaining what's happened. Right?
Yeah.
Point number one. I don't think any adult could object to that. Not a true adult who's prepared to take responsibility. And the second element, as David Conn was explaining earlier on, is that it would be a criminal offence to mislead the public. So that's pretty straightforward as well, it seems to me.
It is. I guess my fear, though, is even within the bounds of what's been outlined, that still allows for the police and other public organisations to investigate themselves. And can they be trusted to do that?
Well, in the case of when the law was I don't mean the police, I mean the law. When the law was investigating the South Yorkshire Police, they actively misled the public and lied, and they obstructed the investigation. So that to my mind was criminal. But now it would be a criminal offence in the face of the Hillsborough law.
Yes, and I'm astonished that anyone questions that.
Yeah, but in that scenario, they would be being investigated by outside forces.
Yes, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
but you're right. I mean, you've got other examples: the Church of England and child abuse.
Yeah. I just think the temptation of public organisations to preserve their reputation at the cost
is
of
massive.
truth is just too high, and that's always going to happen unless there is some compulsion for them to cooperate.
And I think unless you have felt it, the arm of the state coming after you, or hurting you as the Hillsborough families did, unless you have felt it and seen it in action, how insidious it is and how insidious they are or can be. I think it probably is easy to be a bit laissez-faire, a bit relaxed about whether the Hillsborough law comes in or not. But if it comes to your door, you won't feel relaxed about it.
Yes, but I think what's frightening is even after the wrongs have been highlighted, justice still doesn't get served. In the case of Windrush, the post office, Hillsborough, all of those things.
Yeah, people still waiting.
And often recommendations are made and ignored. I mean, people are clamouring for further inquiries into the sex abuse cases in Bradford and the like, and I understand why they're clamouring for that. But has anyone done anything with the first set of recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, there have been people jailed, but has anything really changed would be the question.
Yeah, just in terms of systemically, what are we going to do to put things in place so that can't happen again? Has anybody done anything with any of that? I'm not convinced that they have. So I wonder, does that need to feature in it as well? A compulsion to cooperate, and B, a compulsion to implement. I don't know.
No, I don't either. But thank you very much, Jane. Good questions, Jane. Excuse me, in Redbridge. It's 3:30. Let's get the headlines from Tim Humphrey.
The business secretaries welcome the arrival of raw materials to the UK needed to operate British Steel's final blast furnaces. Jonathan Reynolds also softened his language on earlier comments that he wouldn't want to bring a Chinese.
Fuck you. Fuck you.